At 3:12 in the morning, the room was cold and perfectly still, the only sound the clock ticking and my own breath shaking inside my chest. I lay there staring into the dark, knowing he was standing beside me again, close enough that the air felt heavier, close enough that sleep was impossible. My skin prickled, my heart raced, and I remember thinking how strange it was that fear could be so quiet. If you're listening right now and you've ever felt something was wrong before you had proof, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. Stories like this don't happen in movies. They happen in ordinary homes. Moonlight spilled across the floorboards, and I counted each second by the ache in my chest, wondering how long a person can pretend not to be afraid. That was the night I stopped believing this was nothing. That was the moment everything in my life began to unravel. Every single night at exactly 3:12 a.m., my husband rose from our bed and stood beside me in the dark. He never touched me. He never spoke. He simply stood there, close enough that I could feel the air change, watching me breathe. My name is Ruth Caldwell, and I am 90 years old now. I have lived long enough to know that when your body wakes before your mind, something is wrong. That understanding settled into me early, before fear had a name. The house was silent when it happened. No footsteps, no whispers, just the soft shift of weight beside the bed and the sudden awareness that I was no longer alone. I would lie there perfectly still, my heart pounding so loudly it felt dangerous, afraid that even my breathing might give me away. What frightened me most was not what he did, but how precisely he did it. Always at the same minute, always on my side of the bed, always standing, never leaning, never moving closer or farther away. 3:12 a.m., as faithful as a church bell and just as unforgiving. I told myself it was nothing, that men wake in the night, that shadows play tricks, that marriage carries habits we do not notice. I needed those thoughts to be true, because the alternative felt unbearable. But the nights kept coming, quiet, exact, relentless. By the time I admitted I was afraid, the ritual had already lasted 7 long months in silence. Before fear ever stepped into my bedroom, my life was quiet and predictable. I lived in a small farmhouse outside a Tennessee town where days were measured by chores, not clocks, and nothing ever felt urgent. My husband, Harold, worked long hours and came home tired. We shared a roof, responsibilities, and children, but not many words. Our marriage was steady, practical, and polite, built on duty more than affection. In those days, that felt normal. Love was something you showed by staying. I rose before sunrise, cooked breakfast, packed lunches, and kept the house running. The work filled my hands and kept my thoughts in line. Order gave me comfort. Routine made me believe everything was under control. Our children were the heartbeat of that house. Emily, the oldest, carried herself like a second mother, always watching, always careful. Claire filled rooms with laughter and movement, singing without realizing she was doing it. Little June stayed close to me, quiet and observant, learning the world by watching it. I believed I was doing everything right. I believed stability meant safety. I believed that if a man did not raise his voice or his hand, there was nothing to fear. That was what women were taught in my generation. Endure. Keep peace. Do not ask questions. Looking back now, I see how narrow that world was, how much I mistook silence for security. At the time, though, I felt anchored. I felt certain. I did not know that something unseen had already begun to shift beneath the surface of our ordinary days. It was the kind of life that looks safe from the outside, a life where warning signs stay quiet and fear waits patiently for the moment you finally stop believing everything is fine without ever asking why inside. I stopped sleeping long before I admitted I was afraid. Night after night, I lay awake waiting for my body to tense, waiting for that familiar shift in the room. My mind tried to stay calm, but my chest always tightened first, as if it knew something I was refusing to name. Fear settled into me slowly. My hands began to shake when I poured coffee in the morning. I forgot small things I had done 1,000 times before. The house stayed the same, but I moved through it like someone half awake. Food lost its taste. My clothes hung looser, though I was not trying to lose weight. During the day, I forced myself into routine. I scrubbed floors, folded laundry, smiled when I needed to. To anyone watching, I looked fine. Inside, I was counting hours, measuring time by how close I was to nightfall. Dusk no longer felt peaceful. It felt like a warning. Fear became predictable. I expected it the way you expect pain from an old injury. My body responded before my thoughts could catch up. My heart raced without reason. My breath shortened. Even silence felt loud. I began to understand that fear does not always announce itself. Sometimes it settles in and makes a home. I told myself I was imagining things. That stress does strange things. That exhaustion explains everything. But my body did not believe those explanations. It reacted every time, without hesitation. That was when I realized something was deeply wrong. Fear had stopped visiting me and started living with me, and it was no longer contained inside my own skin. That quiet certainty followed me through each room, and I could feel it pressing outward, ready to touch the people I loved most without warning or mercy yet. I noticed the change in the children before I admitted it to myself. It started quietly, the way all dangerous things do. Emily stopped humming while she did her homework. Claire no longer danced through the kitchen. June stayed close to me, her small hand always finding my skirt. One afternoon, Claire came home and went straight to her room. She said she was tired, but her eyes were dull, not sleepy. At dinner, she pushed food around her plate, eating just enough to avoid notice. The girl who once filled the house with sound now sat in silence, shoulders tight, as if bracing for something she could not see. Emily watched all of this. She had always been observant, but now her eyes followed me everywhere. She studied my face the way children do when they sense danger but lack the words for it. June became restless, waking at night and clinging to me during the day. She flinched at sudden noises. That was when my heart began to harden. Our home felt different. The air felt heavy. Laughter disappeared without announcement. Even ordinary moments felt wrong, like a song played in the wrong key. I realized then that fear does not stay contained. It leaks. It spreads. Children do not change without reason. They carry what adults try to hide. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. My fear stopped being about endurance and became about protection. Whatever was happening in my house was no longer just mine to survive. It was already touching my children, and I knew I could not keep pretending any longer. Waiting suddenly felt like a betrayal, and listening felt like the only way left to keep them safe, even if the truth broke me open right now without turning back ever. I could no longer live inside guessing. Pretending required more strength than truth, and I was running out of both. Fear had already taken so much from me. I would not let it take my awareness too. That night, I decided to stay awake, not by sitting up or watching, but by becoming perfectly still. I lay on my side the way I always did and slowed my breathing until it felt distant, mechanical. I loosened my hands. I softened my face. I practiced the quiet of sleep while my mind stayed sharp. Every sense felt magnified. I could hear the clock mark each minute. I could feel the weight of the house settling. My heart beat hard, then slower, then hard again. Part of me wanted to move, to end the waiting. Another part knew that movement would cost me the truth. I thought about my children down the hall, about the way fear had changed their eyes. That thought steadied me. Courage does not always feel brave. Sometimes it feels like staying still when every instinct tells you to run. I waited. I listened to the silence stretch. When the familiar moment approached, my body reacted before my mind did. Muscles tightened. Breath caught. I did not open my eyes. I told myself that whatever I heard next would change everything. The floor creaked softly, just as it always did, and I understood there was no turning back now because the truth was already moving toward me then. When the moment arrived, the house seemed to hold its breath. I felt him rise from the bed, the familiar shift of weight, the quiet steps stopping beside me. I stayed still, eyes closed, every nerve awake. He stood longer than usual. I could hear his breathing change, rough and uneven, as if something inside him was breaking. Then the floor creaked as he lowered himself, and I understood he was no longer watching me. He was unraveling. What reached me were not words meant for me, but fragments of confession carried by shame. I sensed regret so heavy it bent his body. Fear clung to him, sharp and desperate, the kind that belongs to someone cornered by their own choices. Slowly, the truth assembled itself in my mind. I understood there was money lost, far more than we could ever replace. I understood there were threats tied to that loss, whispered promises of violence that had trapped him. I felt the weight of a debt measured in terror, not dollars, a number that meant ruin. $4,200 was not just money. It was panic, humiliation, and cowardice combined. Then came the understanding that hollowed me out. The debt had been erased not with cash, but with a promise that did not belong to him, a promise made with my child's future as payment. In that stillness, everything rewrote itself, the exact time, the repetition. 3:12 a.m. was not random. It was the moment he had agreed to trade innocence for his own survival. Each night, he returned to that minute, kneeling beside the life he had betrayed, begging forgiveness he was too afraid to ask for in daylight. I lay there without moving, my body rigid, my mind screaming. I realized then that I had never been the one in danger. I had only been the witness. By the time he returned to bed, his breathing slowing as sleep claimed him. I was wide awake. Something inside me had shattered. I understood with clarity that nothing in our lives could ever be repaired, only ended or protected. When morning came, it arrived quietly, like it always had. Sunlight crept through the kitchen window, and my body moved on habit alone. I poured coffee. I set plates on the table. My hands were steady. Even though everything inside me had shifted, I had not slept. Shock sat heavy in my chest, but it no longer felt like fear. Fear had burned itself out during the night. What remained was clarity, sharp and undeniable. Claire walked into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes. When she looked at me, something passed between us that needed no explanation. She did not smile, but she did not look away either. I reached out and touched her shoulder, and she stayed still. In that moment, I knew she felt it too. She knew I was awake now. Harold came in last. He would not meet my eyes. The man who had filled the night with his guilt shrank in the daylight. His silence told me everything I needed to know. There was nothing left to ask. The house looked the same, but it was no longer mine in the way it had been before. I moved through the morning without hesitation, without panic. Grief was there, but it was contained, folded neatly beside resolve. Somewhere between washing dishes and watching the children leave for school, I crossed a line inside myself. I understood that this was no longer about survival. It was about action. Once it settled in, I knew nothing could turn back. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. Emotion would only cloud what needed to be clear. I sat at the kitchen table and forced myself to think in facts, not feelings. I asked for details and I listened without interruption. When it happened, where it happened, who was there? Each answer felt like swallowing glass, but I stayed steady. Pain was no longer something to escape. It was something to use. I understood then that power does not belong to the loudest person in the room. It belongs to the one holding proof. Words disappear. Details do not. I needed dates, names, and the shape of the lie as it had been written. I made him put it on paper, not as an apology, not as a confession of guilt, but as a record of truth, that the promise was made under threat, that my child was never his to offer, that fear, not consent, had guided his hand. Watching him write felt like reclaiming ground I did not know I had lost. I folded that paper and kept it close. It was small, but it carried weight. It meant I was no longer reacting. I was preparing. For the first time since fear entered my home, I felt equipped. The story was no longer loose or whispered. It was contained, and I knew exactly where I needed to take it next. What came after would be harder, but I no longer doubted my footing at all. I walked up the gravel drive alone. The house was large, freshly painted, set back behind iron gates meant to remind people who belonged and who did not. With every step, my legs felt weak, but my back stayed straight. Fear had already had its turn with me. When he appeared at the door, I understood why men like him relied on silence and shame. Power lives in what people are afraid to say. I did not raise my voice. I did not apologize for being there. I stood still and let the truth speak first. I made it clear that a promise made under threat was not a promise at all. It was evidence. I let him see that the story no longer lived in whispers between men. It lived in writing, in names, in a town where reputation mattered more than money ever could. For a moment, he tried to stand taller. He tried to remind me of what he thought he owned, but I did not move. I did not argue. I told myself that predators depend on panic, and I refused to give him any. I explained, calmly, where the truth would go next if he continued. To the sheriff, to the church, to anyone who would listen to a grown man claiming a child. I watched his confidence thin, like ice under steady heat. When I turned away, no one followed me. The gate stayed closed behind me. I walked back down the drive exactly as I had come, unshaken, untouched. Whatever power he believed he held no longer reached me or my children. I felt no victory, only the quiet certainty that intimidation had failed, and that walking away alive in spirit was the only outcome that mattered to me and my family now. I walked away from that house slowly, my legs trembling now that I no longer needed them to be strong. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes, each step carrying me farther from the place where fear had tried to take root. Halfway down the road, my strength gave out. I sat beneath a tree and let the tears come quietly. I cried for my children and the fear they had been carrying in silence. I cried for the years I had mistaken endurance for love. I cried for the woman I had been before everything broke. The air was warm. The world kept moving. That helped. Grief does not ask permission, But it does pass when you let it move through you. When the tears slowed, something lighter took their place. Not relief, not happiness, acceptance. I knew then that there was no returning to what had been. Some doors close without ceremony, and that is mercy. I stood up, brushed the dirt from my dress, and started walking again. Each step forward felt steadier than the last. Home waited, and with it the hardest choice I would make. But my path was clear now, and I did not stop. I returned home before the children did. The house was quiet, emptied of tension but heavy with truth. Harold sat where I had left him, smaller somehow, as if daylight had finally revealed what the night had hidden. I did not argue. There was nothing left to say. The decision formed without drama. It settled into me the way certainty does when it has been waiting a long time. Staying would teach my children the wrong lesson. Leaving would cost us familiarity, but it would give them safety. I went to the bedroom and packed only what mattered: clothes for the girls, a few dresses for myself, papers, the folded note, the little money I had set aside. Each item felt deliberate. I was not running. I was choosing. I asked for help without shame, a ride, a place to land. No explanations. The kind of help women offer when they see the truth on another woman's face. When I told Harold I was leaving, I did not raise my voice. I did not soften my words either. Love does not ask a mother to sacrifice her child. He cried. I kept moving. We left before night returned. The moment the door closed behind us, something in my chest loosened. I did not know what would come next. I only knew that safety had already begun. For the first time in months, my children breathed easily beside me, and I understood that love sometimes looks like walking away together now. It has been many years since I closed that door, and the memory no longer arrives with panic. It comes quietly now, like a reminder of who we became when we chose ourselves. We did not rebuild our lives in grand ways. We rebuilt them in mornings without fear, in dinners where laughter returned slowly, in nights where my children slept through until dawn. That was our wealth. Each of my girls healed in her own time. Emily learned to trust her instincts instead of burying them. Claire found her voice again and filled new rooms with song. June grew into a child who knew that home meant protection, not silence. Watching them taught me that healing does not rush. It waits for safety. I never measured victory by what we escaped. I measured it by what we gained: peace, honesty, the freedom to breathe without listening for footsteps in the dark. Walking away did not make me weak. It made me responsible. If there is one truth I carry forward, it is this: silence is not safety. Love does not demand that you sacrifice your children, and when your body tells you something is wrong, you deserve to listen. Thank you for sitting with my story. If you have ever trusted your instinct when it was hard, or found the courage to choose safety over familiarity, I invite you to share your experience in the comments. You are not alone. Your voice matters more than you realize. Always. Truly.